Ric Flair has always been known as a man of surprises, and even at 76 years old he still manages to shock people. Fans have wondered for decades about his true feelings toward Vince McMahon, the man who turned WWE into a global empire. Rumors and stories have floated around for years, but Flair recently set the record straight with a revelation that caught many people off guard. What he revealed was not bitter, not angry, and not even close to what people expected. Instead, it turned into a story of loyalty, respect, betrayal, and ultimately a relationship that defined much of his wrestling career. The story begins in 1991, a time when Ric Flair was at the peak of his career as the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. He was the top star, the face of the company, the man fans paid to see. Yet behind the curtain, things were falling apart. WCW executive Jim Herd constantly pushed Flair into changes he didn't want, trying to force him to cut his hair, wear an earring, and become a gladiator-style character that had nothing to do with who Flair was. The real breaking point wasn't the gimmick, though it was money. Flair had put down a $25,000 bond years earlier, something every world champion had to do in the old NWA system to ensure they wouldn't leave with the belt. It was a tradition, and the money was always returned once the title reign was over. Flair asked for his money back during contract negotiations, but instead of honoring the agreement, Herd refused. That rejection cut deeper than any insult Flair had ever experienced in the ring. He had given his career to WCW, carried the company for years, and yet this was the way they treated him. To Flair, it wasn't about the money anymore, it was about respect. That night, Flair picked up the phone and made a call that would change wrestling forever. He called Vince McMahon. McMahon had been chasing Flair for years, trying to get him to jump to WWE, and now the chance had come. Flair told Vince that he would come to WWE as the champion if Vince wanted. Soon after, Bobby the Brain Heenan appeared on WWE television holding the WCW championship belt, calling Flair the real world's champion. Fans were stunned. Flair had done the unthinkable, he had walked away from WCW, taken their belt, and handed it to their biggest rival. All of that because WCW had disrespected him over $25,000. When Flair arrived at WWE, Vince McMahon could have taken advantage of the situation. Flair was desperate to leave WCW, and Vince could have lowballed him or tied him down with complicated contracts. Instead, Vince showed him something Flair never forgot. He simply shook his hand and told him that he wouldn't give him a guarantee, but he would make him more money than he had ever made before. That handshake, simple as it was, meant more to Flair than anything. It was respect, trust, and honor, all things he had been missing at WCW. From there, McMahon built Flair up for one of the most memorable runs in WWE history. The original plan was Flair vs. Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 8, a dream match that fans had been begging to see. Politics got in the way and the match never happened, but Vince didn't punish Flair. Instead, he gave him something just as big. Flair won the 1992 Royal Rumble, entering at number 3, lasting more than an hour, and winning the WWE Championship in one of the most legendary Rumble performances of all time. McMahon had promised to make him more money, and he had delivered. More importantly, he treated Flair as a partner, not just an employee. When Flair needed time off, Vince gave it. When big decisions had to be made, Vince consulted him instead of just ordering him around. Even when McMahon was unhappy, he handled it with professionalism. During a 1992 match between Flair and Randy Savage, McMahon grew frustrated with the interference and stopped the match to talk to them backstage. Instead of blaming Flair or humiliating him, Vince worked with him to fix the issue and get the match back on track. That passion for quality and willingness to work directly with his stars left a mark on Flair. For the first time in years, he felt valued. But wrestling is never without challenges. By 1993, WWE was ready to move Flair out of the main event picture, while WCW, now under new leadership, was offering him big money to come back. Flair had a verbal agreement with Vince that if WWE didn't keep him as a top guy and he got a better offer, Vince would let him leave. It was the type of gentleman's agreement most businessmen would ignore when it no longer suited them. But Vince kept his word. He let Flair finish his remaining commitments and even go on WWE's European tour before leaving. No lawsuits, no bitterness, no punishment. Vince had shown that his word really did mean something. Flair returned to WCW, but even during the infamous Monday Night Wars, when WWE and WCW were fighting tooth and nail for ratings, Flair and McMahon never disrespected each other publicly. They competed, but they remained cordial. Still, Flair often thought about the difference between the two companies. WCW threw money around and gave him power, but it lacked the professionalism and respect that Vince had shown him with nothing more than a handshake. When WWE bought WCW in 2001, it brought Flair back into Vince's world. For McMahon, acquiring WCW was a business victory, but bringing Flair back was personal. He wanted the Nature Boy back where he belonged. Flair returned in late 2001, not as just another wrestler but as Vince's on-screen business partner. He became co-owner of WWE in the storyline, immediately being placed into major rivalries with The Undertaker, Triple H, and even Vince himself. At 52 years old, Flair was treated like the legend he was. Their on-screen feud led to a brutal street fight at the 2002 Royal Rumble, but behind the scenes, the relationship was stronger than ever. Vince trusted Flair to carry storylines and gave him the respect he deserved. Through the 2000s, Vince continued to support Flair. When Flair dealt with financial troubles, Vince never tried to exploit him with bad deals. When Flair's family faced tragedies, Vince was there for him privately. Flair often said that everything Vince ever promised him came true. Vince told him he would put him back on top, and he did. That kind of loyalty made their bond stronger with every passing year. The ultimate proof came in 2008, the night after WrestleMania 24. Flair had wrestled his retirement match against Shawn Michaels in an emotional showdown, and the next night on Raw he delivered his farewell speech. Wrestlers from every era came out to honor him: Triple H, Shawn Michaels, the Four Horsemen, Ricky Steamboat, Harley Race, The Undertaker, and many others. It was one of the most emotional moments in wrestling history. At the end, Vince McMahon walked to the ring. The most powerful man in wrestling, the man who had built WWE into a billion-dollar empire, didn't take the spotlight for himself. Instead, he quietly stood in the background, letting Flair have his moment. That gesture meant everything. McMahon knew the night was about Flair, not about him. Now, at 76, Ric Flair finally speaks openly about Vince McMahon, and what he says is not anger or bitterness but respect and gratitude. Their relationship was never about convenience. It wasn't just about money, titles, or contracts. It was built on respect, honesty, and a shared love for professional wrestling. Vince McMahon gave Flair what WCW never did: dignity and trust. And even after decades of ups and downs, rivalries, and farewells, that bond remains one of the most surprising and heartfelt stories in wrestling history. Ric Flair's farewell in WWE was one of those rare moments where the usual lines between good guys and bad guys in wrestling didn't matter anymore. Everyone came together to honor him, and Vince McMahon made sure it was done with the highest respect. McMahon knew the spotlight was supposed to shine on Flair, so he stepped back and let him have that moment while still making the event feel grand. Wrestlers who were usually enemies in the storyline stood side by side, breaking character and showing genuine emotion. This was unusual in WWE, where everything is built on performance and scripted rivalries, but that night was different. It was real. McMahon had organized farewell ceremonies before for other legends, but none carried the same power as Flair's. It showed the respect and bond between them. Every detail of the ceremony showed how carefully it was planned and how much McMahon wanted Flair to be celebrated properly. Even after that, when Flair briefly came out of retirement to confront Chris Jericho, McMahon supported him. He trusted Flair's judgment because he knew Flair still had a sharp instinct for what worked in the wrestling business. Their professional relationship had reached its highest point with that retirement celebration, but personally, they remained close. When Flair later worked in TNA, a rival company, McMahon still checked on him, gave him advice, and offered support. Flair once admitted that he felt he needed to publicly acknowledge how much McMahon had done for him. For Flair, this wasn't just about money, championships, or being booked in big matches. McMahon had given him dignity and respect, and had given him the stage to shine at every point of his career. In wrestling, loyalty like that was rare, but it was clear that their bond went beyond business. Years later, things changed drastically for McMahon. In 2022, his life and career came under intense scrutiny. Allegations of sexual misconduct, hush money payments, and toxic workplace conditions came to light. The Wall Street Journal published damaging reports, WWE's board began investigating him, sponsors pulled away, and the company's stock dropped. Suddenly, people who had once praised him shifted their focus to his alleged misconduct. For most people connected to wrestling, the safest move was to remain silent. Speaking positively about McMahon could harm reputations and opportunities. Many legends chose to distance themselves or give vague, neutral statements. In July 2022, McMahon retired from WWE after building it into a global powerhouse over 50 years. Even when he returned in early 2023 as executive chairman to oversee WWE's sale, the controversy only grew stronger. Current WWE wrestlers couldn't say anything openly without risking their jobs. Former employees had their own stories and grievances. Journalists who once respected McMahon now reported only his failures. But Ric Flair stood apart. At 76 years old, with nothing left to prove and no job to protect, Flair could speak freely. His legacy was already written, so he didn't need to worry about how his words would affect his career. Most wrestling personalities avoided talking about McMahon in interviews. They didn't want to get caught in a debate or risk backlash. Flair, however, did the opposite. He went public with his loyalty in the boldest way possible. On the Joe Rogan Experience, one of the biggest podcasts in the world, Flair was asked about McMahon. He could have dodged the question or given a safe answer about separating personal feelings from business matters. Instead, he spoke with raw honesty. Without hesitation, he called McMahon his hero. Millions of people were listening, and Flair knew his words would be dissected everywhere. Yet, he didn't flinch. He explained that McMahon had always treated him with respect, more respect than anyone else in the business had ever given him. He said McMahon was a great guy and made it clear he didn't care what others thought. His loyalty and gratitude were stronger than any public scandal. This declaration stunned the wrestling world. Social media blew up, and wrestling news outlets rushed to cover the story. Flair wasn't ignoring the seriousness of the accusations against McMahon. He was speaking only from his own personal experience of how McMahon had treated him over decades. Many people pointed out that Flair himself had faced controversies in his life and career, so he knew what it was like to be judged during difficult times. That perspective gave his words extra weight. For Flair, it came down to one principle: he would always support people who had treated him well. He wasn't dismissing what others had gone through. He was simply telling his truth. Flair's comments highlighted something that often gets overlooked in today's world: human relationships are complicated. One person can be a villain in someone else's story but a hero in yours. Public controversies often get boiled down into black and white narratives, but real life is never that simple. Flair knew he had nothing to gain by defending McMahon, and in fact, he risked backlash. Yet, he spoke with confidence, like the legendary talker he had always been. Some people praised him for being loyal and authentic. Others criticized him, saying his timing was wrong or that he was blind to McMahon's faults. But Flair didn't care. For him, loyalty mattered more than public opinion. At its core, Flair's defense of McMahon was about more than wrestling. It was about loyalty, gratitude, and standing by someone who had been there for you. In a business filled with betrayal, politics, and shifting alliances, their relationship was built on mutual respect that had lasted decades. When Flair called McMahon his hero, it wasn't just empty words. It was backed by years of experiences where McMahon had supported him during both highs and lows. That's why Flair's statement carried so much weight. He had lived through enough in his career to know what real respect and loyalty looked like. This moment also revealed something important about Flair himself. He had always been known for his charisma, his boldness, and his willingness to speak his mind. Even in his 70s, that hadn't changed. While others stayed silent, Flair spoke up. He didn't calculate the risks or shape his words to please the public. He simply told the truth as he saw it. In doing so, he gave fans a glimpse of a side of McMahon they rarely saw, the man behind the larger-than-life character, the man who treated him with fairness and respect when it mattered most. The reaction to Flair's comments also showed how hard it is today to deal with complicated issues in the public eye. The internet and 24-hour news cycle demand immediate responses and clear stances, but real relationships don't fit neatly into those boxes. They're layered, full of history, and not easily defined by headlines. For Flair, none of that mattered. He wasn't worried about how people online would judge him. He was focused on being true to his own experiences. In the end, Flair's defense of McMahon will be remembered as one of the defining moments of this era. When everyone else stayed quiet or turned away, Flair chose to speak from the heart. He reminded people that loyalty doesn't disappear just because someone is facing a storm of criticism. It's easy to support someone during their glory days. It's much harder to stand by them when they're under attack. But that's exactly what Flair did. His loyalty showed the depth of his character and the authenticity that had made him a legend in and out of the ring. This story isn't just about two wrestling figures. It's about friendship, loyalty, and the complexities of judging people in a world that demands instant, black-and-white answers. Ric Flair and Vince McMahon's relationship shows that true respect and fair treatment can create bonds strong enough to survive even the biggest scandals. Fans may continue to debate McMahon's legacy, but Flair made his feelings clear. His words came from decades of lived experience, not from public pressure or headlines. And in the end, that honesty may be what people remember most. Now the wrestling world, and fans around the globe, are left to reflect on what Flair's declaration really means. It challenges us to think about loyalty in our own lives, about the difference between public perception and personal truth. Flair showed that sometimes, standing by someone isn't about ignoring their flaws. It's about recognizing the ways they treated you and being grateful for that. For him, McMahon wasn't just a promoter or a boss. He was someone who had given him respect, dignity, and opportunity when it mattered most. And for that, Ric Flair would always see Vince McMahon as his hero.